Russ Grant here, and we're meeting this morning with Robert Whitehouse from St. Paul's Parish in Westport. It's the parish is Westport and Newborough, but in the church in Westport, they've fairly recently installed an electric lift and a new ramp into the building, as well as some other accessibility features. So a great, I think, project in light of certainly community engagement, and interested to hear more about it. So what was the thinking behind doing this project?
Well, the original access, the subject entrance is from the parking lot of the church, and that entrance provides immediate access to the church building as well as the hall extension. So it's the most used entrance of the church. And the original, all that was there to gain access to the door, which was about 5 or 6 feet above the ground level, was an earth-filled ramp. Mm-hmm. And the ramp, first of all, was a bit shabby looking, but it also had a number of problems. In the winter, there was a continual problem of removing snow and ice from it. The ramp was a bit steep for wheelchairs. If you went up there in a wheelchair, you had to have somebody pushing you. And but an even more severe problem was the fact that the ramp ran along the wall of the church, which had a steep roof. So we had falling snow and ice during the winter, which was quite a hazard. Mm-hmm. So that followed with many meetings as to what to do about the situation. We thought of building just a roof over the ramp, but then that would have meant attachments to the church wall, and it wouldn't have looked very good. So we discarded that idea. Finally, after much discussion, we decided what would be really nice is an entrance at 45 degrees to the two walls with a covered area, the roof over it, and the platform at the door level, and with a stairway for people who could engage stairs okay, and a wheelchair lift built into the same assembly. And we also installed an accessible door assembly, or at least that was the planning. And so after much discussion, we decided to go that way. Now, part of it, though, was how to pay for it.
Yes. So, and before I ask you about that, because I'm sure that'll be of interest to people looking at this, I know in my home parish, sand and salt on our ramp are real issues. They've been deteriorating the ramp, and also it gets tracked into the parish hall. So I love the fact that you put the roof over this as well and made it accessible. That sounds like it would certainly also reduce some of those other factors. How is your hall used in the community? Is this something that other kind of groups and organizations use as well?
It's mainly used by the church, used for coffee hour after the services. We do have a seniors music group that use it every week. We would like to offer the hall to other people. It's open for that. Yes. The hall also has a basement which needs some refurbishment, which could potentially be used also as an office or something like that.
Yeah.
And but primarily the hall is used by the church and by the music group.
Well, these improvements certainly make it more the possibility of hall rental or use by other organizations greater. So you were going to talk about a little bit about the cost and I guess the other steps in the process. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, while we were figuring out what to do, we realized that we couldn't afford to do the whole thing ourselves. And so we learned from another parishioner that there was a government program called the Enabling Accessibility Act. And that provides funds for accessible doors, wheelchair lifts, ramps, accessible washrooms, and the list goes on. And the government has fixed amounts of money for each of these, which allow a cost for the procurement of the equipment and for the construction costs. At least that they have a nominal allowance for that. They won't pay for the whole thing, but they'll pay for a lot of it. In our case, so once I heard about that, I went into the government website and I downloaded all the documentation, and I quickly realized that we were an applicable candidate. And this was back in 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic. So we applied, the deadline was July. They didn't reject our application, but they ran out of money that year because there were so many applications for this. But they kept it on file, and they granted, we asked for 92,000, including, there was a contingency in there. They gave us 65,000
Wow.
the following year it was in September. And the way they operate, they'll just phone you up one day and says, we'll give you this much money, basically take it or leave it. You have to make a decision right on the spot. They're very busy. They only have one person looking after a couple of thousand files. And either you want it or you don't want it. You have to tell them within
So
a day.
you need to have your ducks in a row.
Oh yeah, you need.
For that call.
So when they offered us 65, we thought, well, we'd better take it. It's quite a bit of money, and at least it allowed us to get going. So and you have to complete. If they give you money, you have to complete the work within 2 years. They give you 2 years.
Yeah.
And one thing I would emphasize, at the end of the 2 years, you have to submit a report. I made the mistake of writing a nice report up, but you don't have to do that. They have a pro forma report, which is a bit like an examination paper. And when you ask for it, they send it to you and you tick off the boxes. The only thing you have to actually enter into the report are before and after pictures of the project. And I think that's what they want to see more than anything, is proof that you actually used the money and carried out the project. So
perfect. These are great lessons learned. What else did you learn through the process that you would share with others that might be thinking of doing?
Well, there's another source of funding, which is not as high, but that's the Anglican Church Foundation.
Yes.
And it's important to go for that one, the foundation. There are many sources of money from the Anglican Diocese of Ontario, but most of them are for spiritual expansion or spiritual type projects. You know, if you want to build a chapel or something like that. But for basic infrastructure jobs, repairs and so forth, it's the Anglican Foundation. And they will provide up to $20,000. In our case, they gave us, I think it was $7,200. So that was added, of course, to what the government gave us.
I'm told there could be other government programs as well. I know I've heard people talking about things like Trillium and so on. The interesting thing, the government has actually many financial programs for a long list of things. It's a question of knowing about them. And we were fortunate to hear about this one, and we used it, and we were successful with it. But if you have any project, it's worth looking at all sorts of funding, because you can get money. Now, the applications take work, though. You have to be prepared to put somebody on the job and fill out the applications, both to the Canadian government and to the Anglican Foundation, are quite extensive. They want a lot of information, and you have to provide it if you want to be successful in getting money. So that I just mentioned that. How do you see this making a difference in terms of how your hall is used? I think you already kind of talked about that a little bit in terms of other organizations.
Well, it certainly has made the church more attractive. It's prevented, as you were mentioning earlier, the salt and things getting tracked in. At the top of our platform, there's quite a large area now at the door for people to congregate before they actually go in. And I'm hoping in the longer term, in terms of donating the hall for usage, we generally accept donations for use of the hall. But we'll do a little better on that. And but even for parishioners too, it's a much more attractive entrance. And quite a few of the people in our church are getting on in life, just like myself. and we have a good stairway now. And the lift provides, of course, the facility for people who are having more serious issues.
Yes.
And the door is nice too, just to push the button now and the door opens. So
yes.
So I think it's a great improvement to our church.
Wonderful. Well, Robert, I want to say a big thank you for sharing this information. Is it fair to assume if another congregation were thinking of doing something like this, they could reach out to you?
Yeah, I can give advice. I can say a few things now about how you handle this type of project.
Okay.
The first thing you have to do, of course, is decide what you want to do.
Yes.
The next thing you need to do is get an architect involved, because there will be modifications to the building no matter what you do. And you have to get a building permit, and you need drawings in order to get a building permit from the township. So those initial steps are very necessary. The accessible door and the lift themselves are turnkey type contracts with the equipment suppliers. In other words, they will install the equipment, but they of course assume the infrastructure is already done, all the dimensions are right, and they're drop-in fit. Well, for the door, if there's an existing door, they will take out the existing door and put a whole new assembly in. But the contract is fixed in these places, in these two cases, for the lift, drop-in lift, and the accessible door. And that includes the electrical connection and all the labor, and also the certification. So those are good contracts, actually. But where you have to be careful, though, is in the structural work, because this involves going to local contractors, getting bids or whatever. And the one thing that people really overlook is that there's a big difference, legal difference, between an estimate and a quotation. A quotation is a bid, and it's a firm fixed price. It potentially has the assumption that there are other people bidding on the same job. So if somebody gives you a quotation, that means they will do the job for that price, and the price will not change unless the buyer expands the scope of the job, or else just makes changes. And if you ever do make any changes, make sure that the contractor gives you a quote for those changes too, so you know where you stand. And so that now, the problem with an estimate is it's just that. And what happens if the contractor gives you an estimate is they bill you according to actual, and the estimate means very little. So if you accept estimates from anyone, add 50% to what they quote. And I know from my own experience of building my own house here near Westport, and the experiences we had even with this project, where we had estimates basically for the construction work. The estimates don't mean a lot, because once they get into they'll always give you a lowball estimate, especially out in the country. And contractors out in the country do not like giving quotations. So if the best you can do is get an estimate, add 50% to it, and then you'll be probably okay.
That's a good learn.
So that's my main advice on carrying out this. But there's several phases of the project. There's drawings, there's building permits, and then you've got to procure the equipment, and then you've got to build the infrastructure to support it. So there's a fair amount of work. If any church decides to do something like this, they got to put some people on it. It's not as simple as it looks, and you need at least 2 or 3 people in the church working on it. I mean, I'm the treasurer of our church, so I was capable of managing it financially, which is a big part of it too. Looking at the costs, and I was the one that raised the funds too, from the diocese and from the government. But it's if anybody does at least something to the same scope that we did, they should be prepared for a fair amount of work. Yeah. So that's
Well, a helpful caution and helpful insights in terms of what's involved. It certainly might seem simple on the surface, but there's a lot more to it. So
yeah, no,
okay.
it's true. And one thing that's important too is that the contractor who's preparing the building for the lift must have at least 1 or 2 meetings with the lift supplier to get the interface established, the mounting points, the several mounting points, the level difference between the bottom and the top has to be clearly established. If you want to lift the land at floor level, you don't want it 2 inches above or 2 inches below. All those little things got to be right, you know.
Yeah.
The other final thing is for the wheelchair lift. If there are 2 types, there are 2 configurations. One at the exit at the top of the lift, you have a full height. And if the lift is outdoors, even under a roof covering it, you kind of want the full height to prevent, because the lift comes with its own enclosure. And you want the enclosure to be, full height, which is about 6 or 7 feet high at the top, to avoid snow and leaves and children climbing in it and things like that. Now, the other configuration is sort of outdoor-indoor. So the entrance at the bottom of the lift, at the ground level, would just be a door on the wall. But then when you come in the building, you don't need a full height exit. The height of the wall at the exit need only be waist high. After all, you're just walking out of it, or you're rolling out the wheelchair. You don't need the 6 or 7 foot high walls around. So that more or less comes out in the open. So if you're doing an entire outdoor installation, to make sure that you get the full height. If you could put it half height as well at the top level, half height exit, and it still would work, but you've got the problem of leaves and snow and rain.
Yeah.
And potentially, if kids are fooling around, they might climb over the wall and jump on top of the elevator, that sort of thing. So that I guess I can't think of anything else.
Well,
sorry.
I'll say thank you very much, and again, I'm optimistic that if a congregation does think this is something they want to do, that they would look forward to reaching out to you for of your kind of insights and advice. So thank you for sharing them.
Yeah. And I would suggest too, if they're thinking of doing something like that, to just take a drive in Westport and just look at what we did. It's quite easy to find. Westport's not a very big town. It's on the church is on the corner of George and Spring Street, so it's quite easy to find. So, okay.